black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know. I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun, grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage, all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Zia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. It's cold outside. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Cold beer in the fridge, help yourself. I really appreciate you guys being here. We're almost at episode 500. We're almost there. Next week, I will have Les Stroud, Survivor Man himself. He'll be sharing some of his strange encounters, not only filming Survivor Man Bigfoot, but just filming Survivor Man in general. And Les really opened up on different things that had happened to him. And you know, Les is, I was so happy he opened up on some of the stranger things that happened to him that most people don't talk about. So I hope you guys really enjoyed that show. Tonight we'll be talking to Will, and Will comes to us from the East Coast. Will actually grew up on a Native American reservation. And one of these creatures kept coming around the house. Finally his dad shot it. But Will's had encounters in and around that reservation over the years. And he started investigating these creatures. Not only these creatures, but started investigating missing reports. And there's one in particular where a man went missing. It's horrible to hear what Will found. It's pretty evident these creatures had killed this man. So he'll go into that later on in the show. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out Sasquatch Chronicles. You can become a member, get additional shows, there's merchandise. If you get a chance, check it out. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Will to the show. Will, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here. What part of the country did all this happen in, Will? What state?
It all happened in North Carolina in a little place called Cherokee. And when I say Cherokee, I don't mean the, walk through, take pictures with an Indian, stuff like that. The actual reservation.
I gotcha. Well, if you would, just kind of start from the beginning. I know you've had a lot of encounters. I know we're going to talk about a lot of different things here. But it all kind of started out on your family property, or actually on the reservation, I guess your family property. Would you mind starting from the beginning?
Yeah, sure. No, not a problem. So basically what happened is as we lived, back in the sticks of Swain County, and on the little piece of property that was allotted to my family, my dad had built, it wasn't a one-room shack, it was a couple-room shack. So that's where we lived, for the first couple of years of my life. Well, it was about 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. I'm not really sure. I mean, who can really remember that far back? But I was just sitting in the living room floor. I was playing with a puzzle or a toy or game, God who knows what. My mom was sitting at a table reading a book. my dad was sitting at his table and playing with an old CB radio. And for people who don't know what a CB is, it's a citizens band radio. It's used for communications from people on the reservation to the Rangers fire tower, stuff like that. But he was just messing with it. And, it was just a sudden thing. My dad's sitting there, and every now and then he'd just look up out the window like he always did. And this thing walks up and just slams both hands on each side of the window and presses his face to the window. And my dad looked up, screamed like a little girl, jumped up, grabbed his muzzle loader, rifle, whatever, runs out the door, never heard a shot fired. But outside, this thing roared at my father, and it was nasty loud. The only way that I could really describe it, I've heard it described this way before, and it fits. It was like 100 dogs all barking at once, mixed with a lion, mixed with a train, and it shook the entire house. And for, about 20 minutes, this went on. My dad screaming at it screaming back at my dad, and then it just quit. And my dad walks back in the house, puts the rifle away, like nothing had happened. It was weird. It was really weird because...
Now, did you see it, Will? Did you see it come up and put its face on the
oh,
window?
Yeah.
What did it look like?
Well, it's not what people would describe. I've heard people say that they have black eyes. It's not really a black eye type situation. It's just the eyes are so large that the only thing you see is, the black. Its skin, the color of its skin was more of a grayish than a black. It had, the hair from the light inside you could actually see because the hair was right up against the window. You could actually see from the top of the head to the chin and then a little bit of the neck. And the hair the hair around the neck, it was shaggy, matted, nasty looking. As far as a color, it was, a real dark brownish, but almost an auburn brown. The actual face of it, and I've said this 100 times over, they aren't gorilla and they aren't man. And you can tell this. You can tell that through evolution, it's something that may have evolved alongside of us, on our track through evolution. But at some point, it turned and went in a different direction. Because it does not look like a man, and it does not look like an ape. So being a primate is just, I don't see the feasibility in it.
I gotcha. And so, was this the only time this happened there at the home, as far as it coming up and hitting the window like it did, or?
No, it happened then, and then it happened again. I think I was about eight or nine. Things had just dissipated, and I mean, every now and then you'd hear a whoop or you'd hear a scream or something in the background, but there was no actual attacking the house or anything. I think I was about 8, maybe 8.5, 9. My dad had killed a deer, and he was out back, field dressing the deer, getting ready to put it, in cold storage. And again, I was the inside type child. I mean, I played outside all the time, but sometimes I did play inside. And I'm sitting in the living room just playing, and I see a shadow go across the front window, and I'm thinking, who could that be? Why didn't Dad come through the back door? Well, the shadow kept pacing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, at that point in time, we ran off of either candlelight or generator, and 9 times out of 10, my dad wouldn't run the generator during the day because, save the power for the nighttime. And it was getting about dusky dark, and then the generator popped on. Well, of course, Dad fired it up. It didn't just pop on, but everything in the house did pop on, including my dad's CB radio that was hooked up to the car battery and a battery charger. So when it pops on, it makes this, loud noise because there was, I don't know how many people all talking at once because, nobody has any consideration. And I think it might have frightened whatever was pacing back and forth in front of the front window because this thing screamed. And then he started just pounding, I guess, with both fists on the side of the house. And he got to the point of the front window and just kept pounding and pounding and pounding and just drove his arm just straight through the front window. I screamed out. My dad came running in through the back door, sees what's going on, looks at me, even after saying what's going on, looks at me and says, did you just scream? And I said, no. And then he looks at the front window where the glass is busted in, sees what's going on, grabs his gun again, which at this time he wasn't using a muzzle loader. He's actually using my grandfather's shotgun, and runs out the front. And there's, but I call it a conversation between him saying, get out of here, you don't belong here, this, that, and the other, and this thing screaming back at him. And it went on for almost a half an hour. And then I heard gunshots. And then my dad comes back in the house and goes, just basically looks at me and says, oh, it's over. Puts the shotgun away, gets on the CB, calls my grandfather, tells him to, come over and bring your truck. Well, unbeknownst to me, I had no idea what was going on. Come to find out, he had gone outside. I guess he had just had enough. He had enough of being constantly, just terrorized. So he had apparently gone outside, had an altercation, and shot the thing. And had my grandfather come over, and I don't know how they got it in the truck because, where the window was and, my height, the thing was huge. I mean, it looked like it weighed more than, a car at that point in time, that age of my life. So how they got it in the back of the truck and got it hauled off, don't know. But they did. They disposed of it. I don't know if they buried it, burned it. They didn't say. But I asked my father years later, I was like, from everything that I know now versus what I knew then, and all the stories from the elders and from grandfather, and from you, who said that you couldn't pierce the skin because it was called stone man or Nunyenawe, how did you kill it? And he said, well, I shot it in the face 3 times, blew half its head off.
That's really interesting. And I know your tribe had talked about, and I want to come back to that, but you went off there for a second and I want to address it. You had talked about the tribe saying that they were like stone giants. And I've heard other Native Americans say that. There's a certain word that every Native uses, but I know in that area that they talk about them being, and especially down south, they'll talk about them being the stone giants. And I always wondered why, and I talked to some Native Americans and they said, well, it's because of their skin being kind of like armor. And one of the natives I talked to said, I don't think it's really that. I think they go down, roll in the mud, come back out, and as it dries, the mud dries on their skin, it looks like stone. And so that's why they called them stone giants. Is that kind of what the tribe was talking about that you had heard?
Yeah, that's actually what a couple of the elders had actually said. They said through the stories or what they had gathered, through the generations and the stories, is that the hair, after, rolling in mud, standing in the sun, letting it bake on, what they actually killed and ate, blood dripping down the front or whatever, and caking in the hair, the fact that they don't have a hygiene regimen or anything like that, to where they could actually, bathe and things. Everything just gets caked in and baked on, and then they end up with this natural occurring armor. And it was said that braves, back, I can't really think of the year or, how long ago it was, but warriors and braves would go out on hunts, and they'd run into these things, and they would shoot them with their arrows, and their arrows would just ping off of them like a bullet hitting a rock.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I heard too as well from some of the natives I've talked to. I wanted to ask you, how often did it come up to the home? I mean, it sounds like your dad was at the end of his rope, and I kind of understand where your dad's coming from. I mean, especially when you describe where you guys lived. I mean, who are you going to call, really? I mean, you call someone on the CB, which he did, but how often did it come up to the home and bang on the home and kind of torment you guys?
Well, when it first started, it was like once every maybe 2 or 3 days. But as it progressed, it's like the thing had an alarm clock, and it was on a schedule. It was between 2 and 3 every morning, in the morning every morning, without fail. And it didn't start out as a banging. It would start out as, if you could imagine taking a wool coat and rubbing it real heavily up against cedar shingle siding, that scratchy noise. That's what we'd hear, and then it would go from that to where it would realize that we really weren't paying it any attention, to trying to get our attention, and it would just start banging on the outside of the siding, like, wake up, I'm here, pay attention to me.
I mean, it seems like odd behavior for an animal, just wanting attention, and yet you hear them do this all the time, and it makes me wonder about that behavior. What's your take? Do you think it's just attention?
Looking back on it now, I do believe that it may have been just, it may have been a loner. I mean, yeah, some do travel in family groups, some do stay in family groups, but every now and then you get one that's outcast. It's either a young one that was born with a deficiency where it couldn't take care of itself, and the family group didn't want to provide for it, so they ousted it. An older one, that's too old to take care, to hunt for the group or whatever, so it's ousted. And I've seen that many times. I do believe that, it could seriously have been just wanting attention. And with us being humans and not understanding their disposition, my dad took it as an attack other than, hey, I need help.
I gotcha. And did you ever talk to your dad anymore about that? As far as did he ever say what he thought they were? Or did he ever go into any details about after shooting it, moving the body or anything like that?
Well, he did once say, I mean, I asked him several different times once I got older, a couple of different times. But he did say that he knew what it was when he went out. And I asked him, I said, so what was it? He said, well, it was a Sasquatch. And I said, I asked him, I said, are you sure that it was a Sasquatch? It wasn't a bear or anything like that. Now, I knew what it was, but I wanted to hear his take. And he says, yes, he knew what it was. He had heard the stories as he was growing up. My grandfather had told him about it. My grandfather had also mentioned to him about some, visitations that he had had at his property, and they compared notes. And he told but my grandfather told my dad that they were vicious and they'd kill you on sight, which may have, prompted him to do what he did. But, like I said, I asked him and he told me, he did know what they were.
Did anything else happen after he shot that thing? I mean, was there any retaliation or did it pretty much quiet down? Well,
that's something that I'm still working out in my head. It may have been retaliation. My grandfather started having, these things come around, on a nightly basis, daily basis. At any point in time on his part of the property, you'd probably find one. I mean, I didn't see one personally on his property except for the one time, but he started having horses come up dead. His corral was tore into. Barn door was ripped off its hinges. His garden, he grew corn and a couple other things. Almost the entire stand of corn will be ripped down. Things that he wouldn't do himself. He actually caught one once in his corral in the process of killing one of his horses, and he did shoot at it. Now, I don't know if he hit it or not. We were pulling up in the driveway, and you could see him in the corral, standing in the corral with a 30-06. And he was just racking off rounds, right? And my dad got out and ran up to him, told me and my mom to stay in the car, which we did. But, with the windows down, you could hear the conversation, and my grandfather's telling him, damn things, messing around again, killed 2 of my goats, left the bodies all over the place. Actually, one of the goats that was killed, the gut pile, just all the guts out of the goat was sitting on his front porch right outside the door. So as soon as my grandfather walked outside, there it was. And, you know, and he said, I shot the damn thing. Well, that's what he said, but there was no blood trail. There was no evidence that he'd actually shot it. And, I mean, it got to the point to where eventually my dad used the excuse of, you know, he got a truck driving job, so we're going to have to move off the reservation down closer to town, so he's closer to the, you know, the truck yard. But I think it was just, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse after he had shot the one, to the point to where I think he feared for his family, for our safety, because they just kept coming around. They kept killing, you know, on the entire reservation, they were killing other people's animals. You know, it wasn't just one this time. It had to have been several, because my grandfather's place was getting, you know, frequented. Some friends on the other side of the reservation, and when I say the other side, we're talking 20, 30 miles. The exact same night, it was almost like it was, you know, coordinated. My grandfather's place would get attacked. These other people's place would get attacked. And then the next night it was somebody else and somebody else. It was always, you know, two to three people a night, and they were just causing hell.
Yeah, it's interesting too, where you talk about it leaving the gut pile on his doorstep. That's almost a message. It almost feels like a message, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. That's terrifying. So you guys eventually move off the property. Did your grandfather ever talk any more about it? Obviously, I'm assuming he stayed on the reservation.
Yeah, he stayed. He up until the day he died. Actually, on his deathbed, he actually, you know, came out and says, you know, because my mom would always ask my grandmother. My grandmother's, you know, oblivious, as most grandmothers are. I don't know anything. You'll have to ask Frank. And, you know, my dad would always ask him, have you had anything else happen? You've been gone. And my grandfather was always, yeah, you know, you can hear them. I can hear them messing around the property, but we haven't had anything die. We haven't had any, you know, any killings or anything like that. Nothing's come up missing. My barn door has been ripped off a couple times. He had a trailer for like hay and things. It's been flipped over a few times, but, you know, no gut piles on the front porch or anything like that. So apparently the activity died down.
Yeah, it's terrifying, man, especially when you have them on your property like how you're describing. Because, you know, a lot of people, they say, well, why didn't you break out video cameras? Why didn't you do that? You know, you know, during that time, obviously you guys weren't in a position really to have cameras and cell phones and everything else around. But I think at that point, you're just trying to survive. You're just trying to get them to leave you alone. And you find a lot of people, even in today's encounters, people who are recent encounters, living this same type of life, where they're up in the hills in the middle of nowhere. These things are tormenting them. And what are you going to do? Call the cops? I mean, really, what are the cops going to do besides come out and laugh at you? So I think a lot of this actually does go on in the backwoods. I think there is people that kill them, shoot them, get tired, like your father, get tired of them coming around.
Oh, yeah. And that's a definite fact.
And so you started looking into this, and I know there's other encounters that happened. There was an incident when you were hunting. I believe you were with your father, weren't you?
No, I was actually with his brother, my Uncle John. And
was this in the same area, Will?
No. This was I think it's 50, 60 miles southeast of Cherokee. It's in a town. Well, the township is called Brown Mountain, and that's actually what the mountain's called, is Brown Mountain. But no, me and my Uncle John had decided to go. Well, he decided to go hunting. I was bored that day. I decided to go with him. And, you know, we got to the trailhead part, you know, we had three-wheelers then. That was back during the time of three-wheelers, not four-wheelers. So that's been a while back. But so we get the three-wheelers off of the trailer. He got on his, I got on mine. You know, we got everything set up on them, and we left. And we got to where, you know, we like to hunt all the time. And I seen a 4-point buck pop his head up. And I waited. for, a good clear shot, took the shot, and he ran off. So, you got to track it down. You can't leave a wounded animal running around. That's just, bad ethics for a hunter. So we tracked it, and we were following the blood trail, and it'd been snowing up on the mountain. And we were actually going up an incline, and we tracked it up the incline to a little plateau before it continued to go up. And I seen it laying in the snow. And I went over, because it was still twitching a little bit. I was going to pull my buck knife off my side and slit its throat, as good etiquette, not let it suffer. And as I reached down to grab the antlers to pick its head up, my Uncle John started poking me in my ribs and poking me in my shoulder. And I'm like, dude, what? I know what I'm doing. All I got to do is just cut its throat, let it bleed out, and it's a humane kill. And he just kept poking me, and he was looking over my shoulder, I noticed. And I was like, what is your problem? I'm not turning around. I'm not falling for there's something standing behind you. We're going to do this and go home. And he actually put both hands on both my shoulders and shoved me so hard that I hit the ground. And I got up, and I turned around and looked, and I'm thinking, okay, there's a black bear behind me, and he's freaking out. And as my eyes come up, I realize it's not a black bear. There's a damn Sasquatch standing behind me. And at that point in my life, I knew what they were. I accepted it. And I'm standing and staring at it. And it's not a, how far away is it? It's, why is it this damn close? Because it was a good, 10, 15, maybe 20 feet away. I mean, it was that close. It was close enough I could hear how it was breathing, that raspy, chest congested, I'm about to fall over and die breathing, and it was loud. It didn't have its mouth open, so, I couldn't tell you at that point in time, did it have canines, did it look like the pictures of the vicious Sasquatch? No, it had its mouth closed. And it wasn't staring at me, it wasn't staring at John, it was just looking directly at the deer. And I still got my rifle in my hand. And it's standing there. It's not standing stone still, It's standing there, and it's doing its, trademark, just swaying back and forth. And every time I would move with the rifle, its head would follow. It quit looking at the deer and started looking at me. Because these things know what a gun is. They've heard them, hundreds of times in the woods. They know what the pop is. So, as I move with the gun, its head moves. Body doesn't move, just the head. I move to the left, it turns its head to the left. I move to the right, it turns its head to the right. And I looked at my Uncle John, and I said, this is a bad idea. Put your gun down. And we both laid our guns in the snow, which that's a bad idea all the way around, but whatever, fight or flight. I put my gun down, he put his down, and it went back to looking at the deer. And, my Uncle John's like, I want to get out of here. I said, dude, don't run. I don't know what the hell this thing's going to do. If you run, it might chase you down and just end your shit right then and there. And I said, you know what? Let's just back away. Leave the four-wheelers here for now. Leave the guns here for now. We'll come back and get them. We'll just back down the way we came. And as we started to back away, it started to move toward us, or I thought. But it wasn't moving toward us. It was moving toward the deer. It reached down and got the deer and drug it toward it. Now, for a Sasquatch, it's not, I'm going to bend over and heft up this deer, and it's going to take, all my strength. It just reaches down one hand, grabs the antlers, pulls it toward it. And then it did something that I'll never get out of my head, ever. It picked it up and went to walk away, and then it stopped. It put one big massive hand behind its, on its behind its front shoulders, and one big massive hand, and I do say massive because we're talking about the size of, large iron skillets, just huge, on, each end of the deer. Picked the deer up in the air and then separated its arms, and when it did, it tore the damn deer in half, right down the middle. Held on to one half and dropped the other half in front of, where it had picked the deer up, not in front of us. We'd already backed down the hill a ways. But dropped the deer where it had picked it up and walked off with the half that it had, like it was saying, here, you have this half, I'll take mine.
I had a poacher one time tell me a very similar story in Washington. And in his mind, he said a big gorilla walked off with his deer. And he said it threw it over its shoulders and just walked off like it was nothing. And the deer out here are huge. I mean, you can't just throw something over your shoulder and walk off. That's why hunters cut them up, part them out.
Yep.
But, when you were looking at it, can you describe what you saw? I mean, what did its face look like?
Well, it sort of looked like the first one I had seen, but I could see it in better detail. It wasn't a gorilla nose, but it wasn't a human nose, but it was still almost flat to the face. You could see nostrils. You can make out. Well, I could actually make out, because it was still daylight. I could actually make out how the lip actually connected under the nose, and it was more of a curve than just the way ours does, or the way a gorilla's does, a bump. You can make out the thin line of the lips, how actually deep set into the skull that the eyes actually are. People talk about a sagittal crest and how it's normally prominent and you can see it. You could not see it. It did not have a conical head, a conical shape to the head. The head was more rounded. It did not have hair on the face itself, even in the beard area, where a lot of people say that there's actually, like a beard or a goatee. There was no hair. I mean, it was bare from just below the chin all the way up, in the outline of the face. And then the ears themselves were actually set on the side of the head like ours. Unlike what, most reports that I've come across, to where it says the ears are higher up on the head. It was actually, that the ears were on the side of the head. The backs of the hands had a little bit of hair on it, but not a lot. Palms, of course, clear, because I could see the palms of its hand. I could see the tops of its feet. The tops of the feet were covered in hair. The rest of the body was covered in hair. The chest, on the other hand, was almost like a gorilla's chest. You know how there's hair all over the gorilla, except for really sparse right on the chest. Well, that's the way it was, and you could see the skin under it. So if you think about how a zebra is, it's not actually two different colors. There's the color of the hair, and then the skin of the zebra itself. Now, I can't really remember. I was told once, what color the skin was versus the hair, but that's the way it was. So it almost had not a black, white all over, but it was almost a zebra pattern, referring to, you could see the skin through the hair. There was just so much damn detail. I mean, you could see the wrinkles in the skin that close. I mean, there's just so much detail. And this damn thing was huge, Wes. I mean, extremely huge. If you would think about the Incredible Hulk on steroids, that doesn't even compare.
Yeah, I would imagine, too, you'd be terrified. I mean, I realize this is many years later from when you were a boy growing up in the home, but still turn around seeing this thing. I don't know that I would have laid my gun down. I guess maybe it was the best thing at that time, just so there's not an altercation. But I don't know that I would have laid my gun down the way you did. And it is strange, its behavior as far as ripping the deer in half. And that's not the first time I've heard something like that either. It's almost like they do that. Or if you have chickens or whatever, they'll kill all your chickens and leave you one or two. If there's 4 chickens, they'll leave you 2 chickens. And it's kind of bizarre that they have that weird mindset. But, I've heard, too, of hunters that go into areas, and I've had many hunters tell me that these things show up as soon as gunfire starts going off, almost like it's a dinner bell. And so they're not really terrified of the gunfire going off. They know what you're shooting, and it's an easy kill for them. Do you think it was chasing that deer, or do you think it was just in the area and you guys had fired off a shot and it decided to come in and check it out?
Well, there is an extreme possibility that it may have been not so much chasing the deer as being what creatures of their sort would normally be, and that's opportunistic feeders. Once it seen that the deer, it could have been up on the mountain watching us the entire time. It could have watched me shoot the deer and then watched the direction that the deer was going. And figured, okay, well, if it's coming up the mountain, then I'm just going to be here waiting for it. But there was never any signs that he actually, and I do mean he because, well, it was a he, I'm sorry. That region of the body, there was very little hair. But anyway, we're not going to get into that. He could have could have thought, because to have survived as long as they have to have some type of forward cognitive thought. There's no possible way that they could have survived as long as they have and not have that. But, you know, he could have thought, okay, well, here comes a mill. Do I stand here and wait for it to die? Do I grab it? But wait a minute. There's hunters down there. They have guns. He may shoot me if I grab his deer. Even though I have heard of, you know, hunters shooting deer, getting to where the deer would be, and where the blood trail stops, and the deer's not there, but there's these huge footprints. Well, Sasquatch grabbed his deer and ran off. But, you know, as far as, you know, as your question, I believe it was an opportunistic thing to where, you know, it was coming down off the mountain, we were coming up the mountain, and we basically met in the middle.
Had your brother been around the reservation for a while? I mean, was he in shock, or did he know what it was too as well?
Oh, you mean my uncle?
Yeah, your uncle. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he had actually left the reservation a long time ago. He was a lot older than my dad, but you know, he still knew what they were, which is a reason why I think that he wanted to get off the mountain as fast as he wanted to leave. And I asked him later. I said, you know, well, you've apparently heard the stories. Have you ever encountered them before? And he told me a story that's there's no way I could even break it down to even make it short enough. But it was basically, you know, he was out hunting one day and ran into one, and when I say ran into one, I mean ran into one. He had shot a deer, and apparently the deer had dropped right on the other side of where a bear and its cub was grazing or whatever. So it set off the mother. The mother came after him. He took off running through the woods, rounded a bend around a giant oak tree, and just ran face into chest, right into the thing.
Did it do anything to him, or did it just stand there?
He said it just stood there, and then it kicked the dirt in front of him, screamed at him, turned around, walked off.
Yeah, I think it's just fascinating what goes on these reservations. And like you and I talked before, I think it's not so much that it's Native Americans and they have some sort of contact with these things. In my personal opinion, I think it's the reservations are in the middle of nowhere. And there is people around, so there's easy food to get. But for the most part, most reservations, like here in Washington State or in Oregon, you have to drive to, and you're driving out in the middle of freaking nowhere to get to them. And I kind of think that's why they're around reservations. But, you know, at the end of the day, I could be wrong. But you started really researching this and actually started investigating reports. And there was one report, I know it still bothers you to this day, of a man that was killed. Do you mind telling us about that report and what happened?
Oh, yeah, that's no problem. And you're right. I mean, it does bother me, but it's something that people need to know. It needs to be put out there. And, you know, people need to understand, you know, local authority is not going to report what actually happened. As sad as it is to say, until we actually have a body to where, you know, mainstream science will acknowledge this thing as being real, people need to know the dangers. Yeah, you may run into some that are docile, you know, and you hear the reports of people, you know, habituating sites all the time, them leaving gifts to Sasquatch, leaving rocks or whatever. You may actually run into some that are nice, but for the most part, the ones that you're going to run into are not going to be your cuddly, fluffy bunnies. They don't want to be around you. You're a human. They know what you are. They want to not have anything to do with you, and they will do whatever it takes to not be around you. But anyway, so I get an email, and it's from a lady that's about 10 to 15 miles, you know, as the crow flies from here, and says that her husband's gone missing. And my first thought was, why is she contacting me? And he had gone camping, and he was going to do a bit of, as she put it, squatching. You know, just basically setting up trail cameras, being the amateur, you know, Sasquatch researcher, whatever you want to call it, trying to find something within his, you know, campsite or whatever. But he had been gone for about a week. And I emailed her back. I said, have you contacted the proper authorities? And she said, yes, I have. And what they actually told her was, if he doesn't show up in the next couple of days, we'll go look. Okay, well, that's weird. You know, you'd think a missing person after 24 hours, they'd be right on it. She said that they didn't go look. So that's why she was contacting me through a friend of hers. She said, and my husband is a kook. She goes, my husband is a kook. He believes in Sasquatch and this, that, and this, that, and the other. And then that's what he's doing. He's going up there to look for him. But a friend of mine said that, you live close by, email you, have you go look, see what happens. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. So I emailed her back, for it to set up a time, went to the property, and I just asked her, can I look around the property first before I do anything else? So I started looking around the property, and I noticed, the hinges on the barn door are literally ripped loose. I mean, it wasn't an old barn. It was an older barn, but not a barn to where the door would have just fallen off. The hinges were still fairly new, but they were ripped, screws and all, from the wood. The inside was tossed about, hay tossed everywhere, hay bales busted open, and you could actually see where something had bedded down at one point or another. She didn't have any cows that close to the house, so something had been sleeping in the hay. The rest of the property and whatnot, walking around it on the backside of the property, can't really think of exactly what kind of tractor it was. I mean, I know it was a John Deere, but, as far as what was it used on the farm or was it used in the fields, things like that. But it was sitting on its lid, because some tractors have the little canopy, the metal canopy. They don't have a full roll cage, just a metal canopy. And that was actually flipped over on its lid like something came through, pissed off, and just grabbed it and flipped it. And there were several other things. There were handprints, and not on her siding, but like literally in her siding on the house. She never really said that she had heard anything. It could have happened. She may not have even been home at the time. So I call a friend of mine. We're gonna call this friend Tom, because I am, for his own sake and privacy and the job that he does for the county, I'm not giving his name. I call Tom, and me and Tom meet up, pack up his truck, and with the man's wife's directions of how to get to the campsite and things. So we get up there and we get up to the trailhead, and the first thing we notice is his truck sitting at the trailhead, both doors open, headlights on. The truck's not actually on, it's just the headlights are on, both doors are standing wide open, and the front windshield's caved in, and then the hood itself is caved in. And on the windshield, there's, I guess the point of impact, which would be the smallest point, there was blood. I didn't really think too much of it, but Tom put on a pair of latex gloves, shut the lights off, shut the doors, and took pictures of the truck and made note of things of note, like the windshield and the hood and things like that. Looked around on the ground, didn't really see anything. So we walked down the trail, and we got to just about where the campsite was, and then we started noticing things. We started noticing, there was, food scattered everywhere. Cooler was busted open, broken in half. Now, we're talking about one of the red coolers, with the real big ones, and it was actually broke in half. Food strewn everywhere, clothes strewn everywhere, backpack way off in the bushes. The tent itself was ripped to shreds. I mean, just like somebody just grabbed hold of it and just started ripping it at the seams. Tent poles all in bushes. One tent pole was in the tree. Between him and I, we took, pictures of the ground, of everything else. And there were footprints everywhere. And it wasn't just one size, just one footprint here or there. It wasn't a track, there was a track eventually that we found, but at first there was just footprints everywhere, like, several people, but very large, tall people, had just trampled all over the campsite. I mean, and they were deep impressions in the ground. And so I asked Tom, I said, so where is he? And Tom says, I don't know. We need to look around more, Well, we knew that he carried a rifle and a sidearm because his wife had told us. So we got to looking around. We found the rifle under some of the tattered pieces of the tent. And it was, the rifle was completely spent. The little, I think it's, I don't know how many shot magazine that a 30-06 will take, but it was completely empty. I'm more of a handgun person myself. Rifles were something of the past. And then, and we got to looking around, and we went around the backside, and this is a great big oak, so we walk around the backside, and there's this big, massive, smeared into the ground blood spot, like something had been killed there. Now, if, say, her husband had still been alive, and we found him and his campsite wasn't tore up, I would have said, okay, well, he killed a deer, or he killed something, and this is where he gutted it, because that's what it looked like. It was, that thick of blood. But then there was a smear mark, like something had been dragged off out in the distance. So we started following the smear mark. And as we're following the smear mark, we're also following several sets of tracks. And they're going off in different directions and crossing back, over each other. And I think we'd walked about a mile and a half. And my foot hit something, because by this time we'd actually walked into a little bit taller grass. Well, my foot hit something, and I reached down and moved the grass away, and it was a 44 Magnum that was empty. So, we marked where the gun was. We started picking up sticks and jamming them in the ground. So we marked where the gun was and continued further, because even through the taller grass, you could still see the blood. It was just, like somebody had just taken it and wiped it on the grass, like, okay, I came through here. And we kept following it. And we walked about another mile, and Tom said, hey, I found a boot. I said, you found a boot? What the hell's a boot doing out here? He said, oh, nope, wrong kind of boot. And he picked it up, and when he picked it up, you could see a little bit of the ankle sticking out. We found a foot, not a boot.
Oh, no.
And then over the next maybe 14, 15 miles. I mean, we walked a long distance that day. I wasn't going to give up on the woman, because she was distraught. She wanted her husband back. And over maybe the next 14, 15 miles, every half mile to a quarter mile, we'd find a body part. Hand, arm, leg, another boot. And eventually we found the torso. And the torso had gashes across it from, I don't remember if it was right to left or left to right, but it was 4 gashes, and the gashes were spaced at about 3 to 4 inches apart. So the hand that had made those gashes was just massive, because my fingers are not 3 to 4 inches apart, and I'm sure yours aren't. And, and Tom said, so we found all this, and we had, taken sticks and jammed them in the ground all the way through to mark, where all the parts were. And we got to looking around, and we finally found the man's head. And from, it had been beat to hell, but you could still tell from the face and the picture that we had that, we'd found her husband. So we went back to the camp, and it kind of chokes me up, because it's not something that you as an investigator, you don't want to have to find something like that. But we got back to the camp, and I called his wife, and I told her, I said, well, we found your husband. And she was excited at first, and I said, it's not like that. I said, he's gone. And she asked me what happened, and I told her, I said, if I came out and told you exactly what I know to have happened, you'd think I was crazy, and then I'd probably get locked up in a mental asylum. I said, but he was attacked, and he was dismembered over several miles. And of course she broke down, and then Tom, with the job that he does, he made a few phone calls, and the local and state authorities showed up. And they started doing, their investigation, took our statement, took his statement, and, gathered up the remains. I don't know why me and Tom had walked off, but we'd walked off somewhere, away from the campsite, probably to just get air and try to deal with the situation. And I got a phone call saying that we needed to come back to the campsite. So we went back. And there were these guys They weren't dressed in black. They weren't what people say the men in black of Bigfoot and this, that, and the other are. They were just dressed in regular clothes. They looked like regular people, but they had these dogs with them. They looked like German Shepherds, Wes, but I'm not really for certain if they were German Shepherds. But their paws were about as big around as a gray wolf's paw, right? And they're just letting these dogs just walk all over the crime scene. State cops, local cops, nobody's stopping them. They're just walking all over the crime scene. And I'm thinking, what the hell? And I looked at the guy. I said, dude, you can't let the dog do that. You're stepping all over evidence. And he's like, oh, they're fine. They're trying to pick up a trail. And I said, you don't have to pick up a trail. You see the big blood spot, just follow it. You'll find everything, or all the markers now. And they said, well, we're a government agency, and we've been doing this for a long time, and you're just an amateur, and you really don't know what you're doing, so you need to leave. And I told him, I said, I'm not leaving until this is settled. And state and local authorities both walked up, and they looked at both me and Tom and said, you need to leave. You need to leave now. Okay. Well, I'm not getting into an altercation with a cop or anything. I'm not going to jail over stupid shit. Even though it's something that I strongly believe in, I'm still not going to jail for it. So we left. And then in the newspaper a couple of days later, and all over the news, wolves attack and kill man. The wolves didn't attack and kill that man. Or maybe it's somebody else. So I started reading the article. It's giving the location. This is what's supposed to have happened. Man went camping, pack of wolves came in because they found several wolf prints all over the campsite. They attacked him in his sleep, pulled him out of the tent, shredded the tent.
As soon as you were telling me that they were having the dogs run over there for tracks and everything else, I figured that they were going to go with that story because no one may not buy the bear story. How far away from the woman's property did this happen?
From the woman's property itself, it was probably about 8-9 miles because of where she lives, and it's literally on public campground, public camping property or whatever, public access. It's probably about 8-9 miles just up the road from her house.
So really not too far away. Do you think he was having problems at the property? And what do you think actually happened as you play it back from what you found? What do you think actually happened to that guy that day? I mean, obviously we know he got killed, but what is your impression as far as what happened? He pulled up. Obviously something was there if his windows were broke out.
Well, yeah, they weren't actually broke out. They were smashed in, but same difference. We're splitting hairs at that point. Just playing everything back and going back over evidence and everything, he pulls up, and I don't think it actually happened the minute he pulled up because he had had time to go in, set his camp up, put his food in his cooler and whatnot. What me and Tom actually sat and, it took about a week's time to go over everything that, even though we weren't there but a couple of hours, but to go in depth of everything and do a real investigation on things. It took about a week to go through all the evidence. And what the conclusion that we came to is as he got there, set his camp up, something happened. The something that caused this, we still do not know. I mean, I could speculate all day long. You could speculate all day long. All of the listeners could speculate all day long, but nobody would still be able to come up with the why. Why did they attack? Did he attack one first? Or was it just, one of those instances to where you're on our property, you need to leave. He says, I'm not going to leave. So they made him leave, just not in the way that, you'd like to leave a property. But so, he gets there, sets up camp, something happens. They destroy his camp. At some point, he tried to run. He had to have. So running back to the truck, say open one door, they watch him open one door, he's inside the truck, they open the other door. Well, one of them opens the other door, snatches him out of the truck, throws him onto the hood of the truck, which would have caused the hood to cave in. And then, of course, with that much force, and we think about how strong these things are, to throw him into the hood of the truck would have sent him up the hood of the truck and into the windshield, which would have accounted for the way the windshield, well, his backside running into the windshield would account for the dip, coming in, point of impact in the blood. And then from there, either carried him or he got away, runs back into the campsite, grabs his rifle, empties it, and at that point, since the 44 was actually found further away, he empties his rifle. Did he hit something? I don't know. We didn't find any other blood than, what we thought was his. So he empties out his rifle, drops his rifle, or his rifle's knocked from his hands. He's grabbed. The initial, giant blood smear could have come from his torso. So this thing, I'm not saying it has claws. It could have just regular, fingernails. From what I've seen, it was just regular fingernails. But, a lot of force, even, a man with fingernails, you're going to tear flesh. And, so he swipes across the chest, opens up his chest. He's laying on the ground, bleeding to death. And they drag him off by his feet, which would account for the drag marks. And he's got the 44 Magnum on his side. Takes the 44 Magnum off, fires at the thing that's dragging him off, empties the chamber, and as he's being drugged, whether he's, losing consciousness from loss of blood or whatever, the gun falls from his hand. So we find out where we did. And then over the course of the next several miles, where they were going, I have no idea, because at the end of this trail, of body parts and whatnot, what have you, another 5 or 6 miles, and you run into a reservoir and another little camp area where people frequent all the time. So where they were going, I have no idea. I don't know if they were just, okay, they're pissed off, they've been shot at, they're tearing this man apart and just leaving parts as, a warning, this could happen to you. I really don't know. I don't know the why. I know the how and the where and the what, being the Sasquatch, but not the why. Why did it happen? Why did they attack him? Why in the hell did they decide that they were just going to, just scatter his shit all over the hillside? It really makes no sense. The part of the sense that it does make is we did find hair samples. We did find prints. We know what did it. We know what happened. I know for a fact that there is a family group that lives up there. And you can actually hear them on, really clear winter nights. You can hear them scream. You can hear the wood knocks. You can hear the whoops and the hollers. I know they're there. Several other people also know they're there. Was it that family group? Or did another one come through? No, people have mentioned in the past, and I have collected information in the past that one family group will not get along with another family group. So maybe they were at odds, and he was just there at the wrong time. Still don't know.
It sounds like he fought till the end, though. I mean, especially finding body parts everywhere. I mean, it sounds like a real vicious killing, almost like an angry killing, as opposed to something trying to save off from being shot. It sounds like a vicious, vicious killing. I can't even imagine finding that stuff, body parts, and I don't know that I'd do any more investigations on, hey, my husband's missing. I think I'd pretty much be done. I'd be retired at that point. Because, I mean, it's hard to find that stuff, and then to know how this guy died, and then to have those guys show up and say it was a wolf attack. It's I guess it's bizarre. They got to come up with a story for it. You can't just say, hey, this guy was ripped apart. We don't know what ripped him apart. They got to give you some story on it. So they're going to say wolves. Generally, they say bears. But even a bear is not going to be that vicious in killing you. I mean, it's going to kill you right there on the spot. It's not going to drag you 14 miles and have body parts lobbed off as you go. Did that old lady ever have any more encounters around her property? Did you have any more contact with her?
She's contacted me. She actually contacted me several times after that, and and it was always a hi, how are you doing? How's Tom? How's the family? There was only mention of it maybe once, and she said that she had walked out on the back porch once, and her dog took off after something in the field. She thought it may have been a deer, a rabbit, a squirrel, or something like that. And then the dog yelped and came running back in the house, real quick, like, Satan himself was after it. And she said she seen something step out of the woods, and it stepped out. It didn't, make movement toward the house. It stepped out and just raised its right arm up in the air. Didn't move its hand or anything, and just held its arm up in the air for, she said, probably about a good minute and a half, and then grunted, turned around and walked back into the woods, and she hasn't seen it since.
Yeah, it's terrifying, man. It's a terrible story. I mean, it really is a terrible story, but I'm glad you told that, Will, because I know you've been looking into this ever since you were a little kid. I mean, realistically, you had more experiences by the time you were 8 than most people have had in a lifetime. And I'm glad you shared it, because it's a warning message. I hear these, and I'm very hard on Bigfoot researchers, and I'm hard on them for several reasons, but this whole I'm going to go out squatching thing. Well, what are you going to do if one shows up? Most of them don't believe in carrying a gun anyway. What are you going to do if one shows up? You know what I mean? And it's pissed, and now you're the target. And I always say in the past, is every encounter going to be aggressive? No, but there's that chance. What happened to this old guy? Did he get scared? Did he start shooting? And then he was just out there squatching, and then he found him, obviously. So you have to be careful doing that. I had a witness just contact me, and they were out there. They've come across these structures, and and he's just a kid. When I say kid, I mean he's in his early 20s, and never gonna die. And he finds these structures, and they've actually encountered them out there. Well, one night they go out, start banging on trees, and he's out there with all his buddies. They're screaming and yelling, and they got surrounded. And it was game over at that point. It was no longer fun at that point. When they were surrounded, these things were roaring back at them. And it's like, you got to be careful, man. I mean, it's like going out looking for a grizzly bear. You might just come across one, and you're not going to like the way it reacts to you.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I've been at this for, quite a long time. I was, 5 or 6 when it started, when I really started getting, heavily into it and doing due diligence. I was, probably about 10 years old. I'm 41 now, so that's 30 years of this, and it's not something that I just picked up. Oh yeah, it's a fad. It's a trend. I'm gonna do this. No, I started doing all the research and investigation and stuff, because it's not so much that it interested me. It's just the experiences that I had. And yeah, over the years, I have had some, fluffy bunny experiences. I never hugged one, they never talked to me telepathically or anything like that, never left any gifts. But I have had the run-ins to where it's, oh, hey, you're there. Okay. And it's either, they either yell at you or roar at you or, grunt or whistle, or like a really good friend of mine, they didn't whistle anything. It was just blowing, just, but it's so powerful. He said you could hear it, and I have had those experiences, and I've also had some, in the past, and in a later show we'll get more into it if you would have me back. I've had some, really rough encounters. I mean, I hate to even say this because it's embarrassing as hell, but I was urinated at one point in time, and that's a display of it's not really anger. It's more of a, this is my area, get out, or this is mine, stay away. And other things. I've actually had one walk up behind me at a campsite, and as weird as it sounds, and it's not a romantic thing, but it wasn't really that close, but I could still feel the air. It just kind of blew across my ear. I didn't stay there. I left truck and all, but yeah.
Yeah,
but
I'd like to get into more of your encounters. I'll have you back for part 2 for the audience, and it's, I really wanted you to tell not only the encounters when you were young, but this encounter, because I think it's a good warning for the audience listening that, hey, you go out there, you can run into them. They're not tinker toys to play with. They will fight back, and you're not going to like it when they do. And so I think it's good that you shared that encounter. I'd love to have you back, though, Will, to share other encounters and everything else that's happened to you. I really enjoyed talking with you. I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Oh, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to tell that particular story, because people do, like you say, people do need to know. When you go out in the woods, even if you're just going for a family outing, make sure you take something with you to protect yourself, because you don't know. I mean, they are the master of their domain. They're there. Just because you don't see them does not mean they're not there. You need protection, whether it be against a bear or a cougar or a Sasquatch. You still need protection. You need to protect yourself and your family, because you don't want to end up like that poor fellow, strewn over the course of about 15 miles. You want your family to be able to know, okay, is my husband, brother, son, whatever, wife alive? Are they dead? What happened? Just take precautions. That's all I ask, is take precautions.
Yeah, and I can't wait for part 2. Thanks again, Will.
Yeah, not a problem.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Hope everyone can join me next week for episode 500. Until next time, everyone.
Something quieter.